Hello, welcome back to Going Walkabout. Today I continue working on the public access. In the previous episode I started working on public access. So what I did is that I used the tab bar, and for every tab in the tab bar I either hide the screen, I show the message you need to log in, or I actually showed content. And for the Explore tab I was showing content. As well for the settings, but that part is covered. Now in the Explore screen we had a little bit of an issue with images loading, fixed that, but now we continue when we were clicking on a trip to actually see it. And I already told you, as soon as I clicked the trip it failed. And that is what we're going to discover today, and I'm going to tell you which things I had to fix. There were actually quite a few of them. Well, the very first one was, of course, when I opened the trip, it failed, and that was happening here in my trip user. So when I open a trip, I need to determine, are you the owner of the trip, are you following the trip, or in this case, are you an anonymous user looking at a public trip? And that last part I didn't cover, because I was just retrieving the current user and I was using that here to get the document that either you're a follower of the owner of the trip, and of course that failed because I didn't have a current user. So what I did is I created a little bit of a check on here, and then I returned an on failure. And it's quite interesting because I did print a statement here, because this part is actually my old code, and it is saying that I have a problem here because the trip user cannot be found, etc., and need better error handling. And this is a general thing that I think in my whole database access is not working correctly, because there's something different between failing and not finding anything. And I don't make that distinction well enough, so that's why it's a little bit weird. But for now it's fixed, because if I don't have a user, I return a failure, and a failure is not a problem, because the rest of the code works well. Either you're you don't need to follow, or you don't need to be the owner of a trip to view it. That was already working in the past. But the problem was that in the past you were always authenticated, and in this case you were not. So even in the old code this would get into the failure, because there wouldn't be a document if you would be a random anonymous user. So covered that part, and then it continued. And that means that when I go to the Explore tab here, I can load the trip. But I was having another problem. It says 3 posts, but if I scroll down, the list was empty. It was just not loading posts. And this was a little bit of a different issue, and I need to show you that, because it was actually just a security rule. And the thing was that my whole app is built on authenticated users. So I have my security rules on my Firestore database that all don't want to do anything if you are not an authenticated user. So let's see if we can have a look at that. And this is my security rules. Now let's go back to a while. Let's see, it's a long time ago that I worked on it, and we could see here, if the public's public, if the trip is public, it need to be shared, and I need to have an authenticated user. And then here, when I was reading my post, read my post, I would call this if it's an authenticated user, or if the trip is public. And that would of course fail. And when I change that, very simple here, I just took this part out of the equation. So as soon as the trip is shared, you have access, and it worked fine. So this was just the thing of my security rules. Now this whole security rules thing, I find it fairly complicated, and I'll probably do a whole separate video on it one day. But for now it's covered. I can load my post, and I could continue further on in the trip. So let's go back to where we were and see the trip. Now we have the trip, and I could follow them, and of course I could open the post, etc. That was all working, because I actually had already the way that not following people could see the post, etc. So it was all working already in a way, but there were just a few little details that I needed to cover with. Now the next thing I ran into was that if I went to back here, go back to the top, and I wanted to go to the followers, this list was actually empty. And of course I want to make sure that you can see the owner, and if this trip is having a lot of followers, etc., because I wanted to have the full experience of the product. So I needed to work on that list, and that list was here in my followers. is what I'm actually doing, what you cannot see now, but if you are the owner of a trip, you get a button here on top to invite people to follow your trip. That's the whole idea. You create a trip, you're the owner, you want to invite people that might be interesting to follow that. Maybe your family members if you go on a trip or somewhere. And that button needs to be hidden if you're not the owner. So I had some logic that would set the allow invite to true, but that logic was using my current user. So I had to replace that because that part of code was just outside here to check that, and that would fail because this fails in an anonymous user. But in the current situation, if that fails, it's not a problem because it never will get and set that, and it will work fine. So again, a small adjustment to make sure that I could show this list instead of just bypassing and not showing any data. The next thing was that when I go back here, there's a button where you can flag trips. So if you're looking at a trip, you're not happy with it, etc., you can flag it. It's also a little bit of an Apple recommendation that if you have publicly generated content, if it's inappropriate, you need to be able to report it, etc. And I all dealt with that, and there's episodes on that a long way back because it was an issue appearing with one of the first Apple reviews I had to go through. So I fixed that. But in this case, you're an anonymous user. So if you're an anonymous user, you cannot report anything. You're just viewing it. And we have to assume that if it's a public trip, if it's a featured trip, because it shows up here in the Explore screen, that it is, let's say, not flagged by anyone, because if it would be, it would have been taken down. So I just hid the flag button here to deal with that. That was also a very simple fix, because in my header here, this part of the header, I have the flag button is hidden. If you're the owner, that's the logic. If you're the owner of a trip, of course you cannot flag your own trip. And I just added that, or you're not authorized, and now the trip is hidden, and it works as well very well. Also here on the follow, now the whole idea is if you're on this trip and you're logged in and you follow, then you follow the trip and you get notified of changes of that trip. That's one of the main features. Existing trips you can follow, you get notified when something happens in one of those trips. But of course, I'm an anonymous user at the moment. As you can see, I'm not logged in or anything. So if I go here and I press the follow, I wanted to implement, you first need to sign in and then continue on that. So I had to show up this screen, and in order to do that, I just went here. When I click the follow button, that's this button, I check for the trip, and if it is iOS 14, because all this logic I've been doing in anonymous access is for iOS 14 and higher, and that is also because I just don't want to muck around with any of the other iOSs. I might even soon going to ditch all lower versions, but for now, this is the way it works. So if it is iOS 14, if you're not authenticated, so you're not authorized, then I just show my hosting view presented, and I return. So I never get to this part below to sign up. And now there's a little bit of a thing, because after logging in, you basically get back to the start of the application. And maybe in the future, I want to make it a little bit nicer that you remain on this content and still continue that process. But for now, because I'm still in my mixed UI kit and Swift UI, it's a little bit harder to do that. Eventually, I just want to flip the authentication state in my authorization manager or anything, and then with Swift UI being reactive, it will show, okay, now you're apparently still in the same view because we popped up that login window, you're authenticated, so I can continue with the behavior and stay where I am. Right now, after login, there's a redirect, and eventually I will change that. But for now, the thing is that the application works for anonymous users. I'm very happy with that. The functionality I've done in the last few weeks is that I implemented authentication with Apple. I simplified my whole sign up screen, etc., fitted it in one screen, and I created public access. And that will be the basis of the next version to push to the Apple App Store. I still need to do, like say, a few edge cases. First of all, I need to test thoroughly everything also on the iPad, because a while back I improved iPad behavior, and I haven't tested anything of this on the iPad yet, so I need to do that, and I expect still some minor issues to be fixed. And second, I need to test everything on a lower iOS version than 14, so that I can make sure that also those users who still have the old behavior where it's mandatory to sign up, etc. Now, statistics show that there are hardly any users with lower iOS versions, but still, for now, I want to keep it there because ditching everything below iOS 13 at the moment is a little bit too early. But it's on the top of my mind, and I probably will go and do it somewhere in the next couple of months, or maybe in the second half of the year after iOS 16 has been released. Anyway, I'm happy with the progress I'm making. I'm happy with the results of this whole public access. I'm ready to go and do the final touches to publish it to the App Store, and then I'll make another video about that. So I thank you for watching. If you like it, please like and subscribe. It's appreciated. If you didn't like it, subscribe anyway, because the next episode might be better for you. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.